Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and I am back. I am so excited to be back. I took a mental health break, I think starting back in October, and I felt like I needed it, and I was planning to come back the first of the year in January, but I wasn't quite ready and I needed a little bit more time. And I've been so busy also with the Pre to Post Transplant Foundation. We've been planning our third annual transplant social, and that has kept me extremely busy. So it is going to be next weekend. So if you are in the Houston area around March 22nd and you want to come to an event that is so much fun, so educational, so inspirational, where you get to meet new people, talk to a lot of healthcare professionals about transplant, play some fun games, do some fun activities, have a blast. Then you can go onto the foundation's website and register for the transplant social. I'll have the website to that in my show notes. It's next weekend, March 22nd in Houston. So if you're in the area or you're going to be in the area, then you should totally come. It's for transplant recipients, living donors, caregivers, friends, family, supporters, anybody who wants to come learn about transplant can come. Anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. I want to talk about the episode and I want to talk about the podcast and my plans for the future. And I've been thinking a lot about it. I really want to interview a lot more people, but I also want to do something different. I want to change it up a little bit, and I haven't quite decided what that's going to be yet. But for now, I'm just going to start, go back to interviewing amazing guests and hearing amazing stories. And when I figure out the direction that I want the podcast to go, of course, you'll be the first to know. So let's talk about this episode now. I got a chance to interview Sue Green. She's a liver transplant recipient, and I actually interviewed her at the end of December, thinking that I was going to come back in January, but I didn't quite make it. So I've been saving this episode, and I'm excited to get it out. Sue talks a lot about her liver transplant journey, all the struggles and challenges that she had to go through and overcome. And she talks a lot about her book that she wrote based on her experience. And I put a link to purchase her book in my show notes, but she also talks about where you can purchase it in the episode. So this is a great episode. Uh, I learned a lot actually. I did a lot of research after I interviewed her, and it kind of made me change a few things that I've been doing, and you'll hear more about it when she talks about it. I don't want to give it away, but it's a great educational episode, and I'm excited to share it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I know you guys are going to love it. So with that, help me welcome my guest, Sue Green. Hi, Sue. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So first, let me just ask you when you had your transplant, where you had it, and why you needed one.
I had my transplant at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC, in January of 2021, and I needed it because I had cirrhosis of the liver. Um, I also had liver cancer, but I had had radiation for that. The transplant was for the cirrhosis.
Okay. So it was in January of 2021. So you're still pretty recent. What, January, what,
Yeah, it'll be 4 years.
4 years? Okay. All right.
It was
Well,
January
that's
21st.
January 21st. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what was going on and you said you had cancer. Is that what started everything? Did that start before the cirrhosis or after?
I don't really know because when I was diagnosed, which was 2017, I didn't really have very many symptoms. I had no idea that there was something wrong with my liver until they did imaging. I was feeling very tired, and I went to my primary care physician because of that, and she did a thorough examination. And the only blood value that was abnormal was I had low platelets.
Oh,
So she referred me to a specialist, and he knew right away what was wrong with me and did imaging to confirm it. And at that point, I had three tumors in my liver and I had cirrhosis.
oh, wow.
So they told me that I'd have to have a transplant or I would die. And but first, I needed to get radiation for the tumors. And if they had not responded to the radiation by shrinking, they would not have done my transplant.
Yeah.
So luckily they did.
Yes.
And so I got on the list for two hospitals, the waiting list for a liver. And and then over the next 3 years until I had the transplant, I just got sicker and sicker, um, and got
So
more symptoms of
were
liver.
you on the transplant list for that long of a time?
No, it took me about a year to
Oh,
get
okay.
to the transplant list. I mean, I know you know this, but you have to get a lot of things evaluated, every organ in your body, and they
Right.
evaluate your social support system and your finances. And um,
Right.
so it's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I did it for both hospitals and got on the list. And then they told me that I would never come to the top of the list because I was too healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, most people that get to the top of the transplant list are really, really ill.
Yeah.
And at that point, I didn't really have enough symptoms, or discomfort or, um, things that weren't working to be at the top of the list. So I decided I needed a living donor.
Okay.
And that's how I found University of Pittsburgh. I found them online essentially. They are the largest, they do the most living donor liver transplants in the country. And they had a pretty significant outreach program. And they also have a program that helps you figure out how to find a living donor. So all of those things appealed to me, and I started to go down that path to find a person that would donate to me.
Before we get there, I do have a couple of questions about your cancer that you had in your liver. I was just curious. You said you had to go through radiation and hopefully the tumors shrank. I was just curious how long it took for all of that whole process to happen before they're like, okay, you can, you're gonna be able to get a transplant now.
Yeah, I would say it took between 4 and 6 months for them to figure out that I need what I needed, and then you have to get fitted so that the radiation goes to the exact right place. You get tattoos on my mine were on my abdomen, little tiny black dots,
Oh,
and that helps them focus the radiation in the right place in your body. And of course I had to go through figuring out where I was going to do this, who was going to do it. And then once I started to get the radiation, it was I think 3 times a week, and it wasn't for a big long time, but after, before I did all that, it took about 4 months, I think.
Wow. And what
Yeah.
were you thinking, like going through that? Like, because, they told you if the tumors didn't shrink, then you weren't going to be able to get this transplant. Were you nervous that that was going to happen? Like, how were you feeling during this whole process?
I was nervous,
Yeah.
um, but I still was early in the process enough that I think I was still in denial.
Yeah.
When they diagnosed me, or shortly before that, I was pretty healthy. And it was a real shock to me to be diagnosed with cirrhosis and cancer. And it took a while to sink in.
Yeah.
Uh, and the radiation for the cancer was not a difficult process to go through any more than any other procedure that you go through in the medical system. But it
Right.
wasn't painful. It didn't hurt. It didn't even really make me t any more tired than I already was. So it wasn't a traumatic experience. It was just, I mean, I think I was already just so blown away by the whole thing that that was a small part of it.
Yeah.
And I was happy to get radiation and get rid of the tumors. Like most people, cancer was not a great thing to hear that you had.
Right.
It was a relief to get the radiation.
Yeah. And I'm sure they checked everything else and to see if that the cancer had spread anywhere else, and it was
Right.
just in
It was
the
just
liver.
in my liver. So
Okay.
that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. So after you finished all that, you said that you were starting to get sicker and sicker. Like what was the symptoms that you were having that was making you sicker, after you were done with all of your radiation and the cancer was gone?
Well, I didn't have several of the common symptoms of liver disease. I never got jaundiced. I never turned yellow or my eyes turned yellow. I never
Mm-hmm.
got ascites, which is when your abdomen swells way up and they have to drain it. I never got either one of those.
Yeah.
uh, which is good. But they told me that I had esophageal varices, which are when your blood cannot go to your liver because the liver is so damaged that it just won't flow through there anymore. It
Yeah.
has to go somewhere, so it goes to the vessels around your esophagus, and it creates like little balloons along your esophagus, and they balloon out, and because they are stretched, they are weaker and they can burst. And
Oh,
I had been a nurse, and I had had a patient once that had esophageal varices, and they burst, and it was a totally frightening experience. I mean, there was blood all over the floor. He bled so much, I just couldn't even believe it. So it was very scary to me to be told I had esophageal varices, because when they burst, which they do because they become weakened, um, you start hemorrhaging, and it's a medical emergency. So
right.
that's scary. Um, so I had that. And the other thing that was very difficult to deal with was I had um, ammonia in my bloodstream, which happens when your liver isn't working. And that affects your brain. And, I could tell that I was getting worse and worse in terms of my functioning. I um I couldn't walk very well. I couldn't think very well. I slowed way down. Everything I did slowed way down.
Yeah.
And um so that process was uncomfortable and scary also. So by the time I had my transplant, I was very ill. And
Yeah.
but still uh not at the top of the list. I mean,
Yeah.
people that are on the list to get a liver transplant are very ill. And um, and many of them die. It's it's uh it's really tragic.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to have a living donor, and people do better with a living donor, but mostly that's because they aren't as sick as the people that rise to the top of the deceased donor list.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but it's also better because you don't have to get it. It can keep you from going through the worsening liver failure.
Yeah.
And so you avoid, those last terrible months when you're in liver failure because you can schedule it yourself. Actually, they leave it up to the donor to schedule it. Um, and so I just decided that was the best way for me to go.
Yeah, for sure. And then you found the program in Philadelphia.
And they were very helpful.
Yeah.
They have you designate champions for you and, friends or people that you think will fight for you to get your donor.
Yeah.
Um, and that, even if it doesn't create the situation where you find the donor, it makes you feel better. It gives you hope.
Yeah.
And there's people there supporting you. And, whenever you're this ill, people around you and who care about you really want to help you out. And
Yes.
it was one role that people could take on where they could help me. Um, so I wrote a letter, and one version of it was sent to my family members, and then another version of it was posted on online and social media, and my friends, reposted it. And my half sister, who I had not seen in 30 years, called my sister and said, "Is this Sue who is asking for a liver?" And my sister said, "Yeah, unfortunately it is." And then my half sister, Christina, called me and said, "If you need a liver, I will donate mine."
Wow.
It's just really a touching and generous offer. And
Yeah.
it was a miracle. I mean, it just felt like, I was at that point by that time that I really wondered if I was going to make it. And that just really helped me to feel better and have something to look forward to. When you're on the waiting list, it's so hard to wait,
Yeah.
and get sicker and sicker. And so she volunteered, and I said, let's go to UPMC. And the donor has to go through they have to jump through the same
Right.
hoop that you have to jump through.
Yeah.
It's pretty extensive,
Yeah.
as you know, every organ in your body. And so she did that, and she was a good fit for me. And so they leave it up to her, and she scheduled it for January 21st. And that's what happened.
So, you said that you hadn't talked to her in 30 years. How did she find out that it was you? Were there other family members that kept in contact with her, or was it just
Well,
by chance?
she had reached out to me on Facebook, not that long, but maybe 6 months before,
Oh, okay.
or maybe even a year, but we didn't talk a lot or
Yeah.
communicate a lot on Facebook, but she knew how to get a hold of me. And my sister was on Facebook a lot more than I was.
Yeah.
Um, and they were connected also. So she knew how to reach me. And she did. She reached out, and I was very happy that she did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she scheduled it and you guys had the transplant. Did you see each other beforehand? Like before everything happened?
We
And
talked. We
okay.
talked on the phone, and but I didn't see her. until we got there. But what I did was I went up a month ahead of time and rented an apartment and isolated myself because if I had gotten COVID at that point, they wouldn't have done the
Right.
transplant, and I didn't want that to happen. So I was already up there, and then she came, and you both go into the hospital at the same time. They operate in two different operating rooms, but at the same time.
Right.
What happens is they take out 60% of her liver. They take out all of my diseased liver and put the 60% into me.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, we both have full size functioning livers because livers regenerate.
Right.
And so that is amazing to me. The liver is just, it's not something I paid a lot of attention to before, but
Right.
once I started learning about the liver, it's an amazing, amazing organ. Does so many things for us, and we don't even totally understand it.
Yeah.
So when it goes bad, then they cannot replicate what it does for our bodies.
Right.
Transplant is the only answer if you're in advanced stages of the disease.
Right. And so after you had the surgery, how did everything go? Like how you said 3 months, everything was great. So did you have any complications afterwards, or did she have any complications?
She did not really. She did really well. And I think I actually had her on a radio spot with me the other night, and she would tell anybody that asked that it's major surgery, but it was not all that hard to recover from.
Yeah.
I had the same experience. It was my fourth abdominal surgery in my lifetime, and I knew what to expect. And abdominal surgery is one of the most difficult surgeries to recover from. But
Right.
I mean, I always laughingly say, I don't think I had any nerve endings left in my abdomen because it was the fourth time somebody cut me open. So I didn't have a lot of pain. They managed my pain very well. And I was up and walking within a day
Yeah.
and did really well and was discharged before they had predicted I would be discharged.
Hmm.
And you do have to have someone with you for 4 to 6 weeks afterwards. And I had, as I said, rented an apartment in Pittsburgh because you have to go back to the clinic every 2 or 3 days. So I had people set up to come one after the other to take care of me and be with me. And first my daughter came and she was there for a week. And then my second daughter came. And over that period of time, I was getting worse and worse. And when my first daughter asked, the clinic why this was happening, they told her they thought it was the immunosuppressants. And
Yeah.
I'm sure part of it was, but when my second daughter got there, she got me up and I was feeling worse and worse. I couldn't do things like I couldn't inject myself anymore. So I knew something was going wrong. But when my second daughter was there, she tried to take me out one day and I collapsed on the floor. And she got me back to bed and called the clinic and they said, call an ambulance. And I went by ambulance back to UPMC and I had COVID
Oh.
at a time when COVID was really scary.
Yeah.
And I think we all thought I wasn't going to make it through that. Um, I'm also diabetic, so I had a couple things working against me.
Right.
But and they admitted me to the hospital. I was there for more than a month after that. And my daughter went home because no one could come visit me at that time. They wouldn't let you. And so I was there in the hospital, and my COVID was almost all neurological problems. I was hallucinating. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I was just a mess. And so it was very scary for everybody. Um, but over time, I got better, and I ended up in UPMC's has a rehab hospital, and they transferred me there, and that's where I stayed for the last month of my hospitalization. And it was it was really scary, but I got better, a little better every day. And towards the end, they started doing COVID tests. I had to have two negative tests before they would discharge me. And I kept having a negative one and then a positive one
Yeah.
and then
That's
a negative one.
frustrating. Yeah.
So by that point, I still wasn't real great in terms of my physical health, but I wanted out. And eventually I got discharged and went back home after I went to the clinic one more time. And so I then I've had long COVID ever since, which the hallmark symptom of long COVID is enormous fatigue. Um, it's almost like chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing that you can do about it except I had to learn how to pace myself. And I had to accept that I had to really cut way back on what I could do in a day.
Yeah.
So that's been a transition.
Do
Um,
you test positive for COVID when you, like, do you still technically have COVID, like when you test
no,
for it?
they do believe that the reason you get long COVID is that the COVID stays in your body and it goes to different sort of places within your body.
Hmm.
And since it's not gone, it still affects your body, but it's not like I'm contagious and I don't have any of the other symptoms. Really, my only symptom from it is enormous fatigue.
Yeah.
And so that took some getting used to, and it was a big transition for me. But my liver, I did go through one rejection episode about a year after.
Yeah.
Um, and they quadrupled my immunosuppressants, and which was very upsetting and did not make me feel well at all.
Yeah.
But it took care of the rejection, and so I was good. But that first year after I had my transplant, I was essentially bedridden. And I really think it was from the COVID, not the
Yeah.
transplant, because most people that have a liver transplant, they aren't bedridden, uh,
Yeah.
for an extended period of time. Uh, but it took me a long time. In the meantime, um, at a year, when you have a liver transplant, they give you a liver biopsy. And so I had that, and I have fatty liver disease in my new liver,
Oh,
which does happen to some people, not everybody.
yeah.
Um, and I know it's not because I'm doing anything that I did before. What I finally decided about my fatty liver disease, and it's called so many different things. I don't know if you want me to go into that, but it's confusing for people because it's not supposed to be called fatty liver disease anymore, but I use that term because that's what people recognize.
Right.
So what I had was MASLD, in my new liver, metabolic dysfunction associated um, steatotic disease. And it used to be called NAFLD. Um, so I have that, and some people just get that again. I know that I was eating really well. I believe that my liver disease was caused by diet soda. Um, there have been two studies that I know of that have been published where they looked at diet, so excessive use of diet soda and fatty liver disease. And
Hmm.
I qualified for excessive use. I drank diet soda every day, all
Yeah,
day, and
yeah,
didn't drink much of anything else. So I'm fairly certain that's what caused my disease. And I don't drink diet soda anymore. And that first year, I was so scared. I think all I ate was oranges and tuna fish, um, because I was really afraid of getting ill again. So my diet is not causing that. I'm fairly certain.
yeah,
But it's a complicated and somewhat confusing disease, but it's mostly from excessive use of um, sugar,
yeah,
artificial sugar especially, and high fructose corn syrup are two of the biggest culprits in our diets. And you get the corn syrup from processed foods, and the the artificial sugars, um, a lot of that is from what people drink. You know, people
right.
drink diet soda, people drink other drinks with artificial sugars in them, thinking it'll help them lose weight or maintain their weight. And it doesn't. It makes you gain weight, in fact. And and it causes liver disease if you drink it exclusively and excessively.
Yeah.
So it's
Is it, did you ever look at like maybe your sister who donated part of it? Does she have any symptoms of fatty liver? Like, does she drink those things or has she like maybe tried to find out if she does?
well, she had to go through, you know, the evaluation to donate the
Oh,
liver,
true. Yeah.
and she did not have
Oh,
fatty
okay.
liver disease.
Yeah.
And you know, she's like a normal person, which I don't feel like I'm normal anymore because I can't do anything. Um, or I don't want to. I don't want to make myself ill again. But
Yeah.
so she, like any person, she occasionally has a soda or a diet soda. Um, and I think she'd be the first to say that she doesn't eat exactly the way that she knows she should all the time.
Right.
But she obviously was doing better than me.
Yeah.
Um, and she's pretty healthy. So she does not have it. And so it didn't come from her liver. It
Yeah.
came from my body. Um, so whatever was causing my fatty liver disease, it's whatever was causing my metabolic dysfunction,
Right.
it's still there. I'm still diabetic.
Yeah.
And
Does the
anybody that is diabetic needs to ask their doctor to test them for liver disease, because while it's becoming more and more common just in the general population, at this point, 1 out of every 3 Americans has fatty liver disease. But if you're diabetic, it shoots up to over 70%.
oh,
So
wow.
it's very common if someone's diabetic, they already have metabolic dysfunction and they're vulnerable to this disease.
So I know we talked about your fatigue and you said that that's probably from COVID. What kind of symptoms does the fatty liver disease cause? Like, does that contribute to the chronic f fatigue or like what
Yeah,
other things?
you
Okay.
know, it's very hard for me to separate out how much of my fatigue is from COVID, how much is from having the transplant and now having mast D again, and how much of it is the immunosuppressants. Um, it's probably all three, but you know, two of those I can't do much about.
Yeah.
So the only thing you really can do for chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms is pace yourself
Yeah.
and be very careful about overexertion because now they are saying in the literature that if you know, overexert yourself and you have those days when you just collapse afterwards, which is what happens to me, that's harmful for your body. And so you want to avoid that.
Right.
But that it takes a lot to change how active you are and to
Yeah.
be careful about overexerting yourself.
Right. Yeah. So, and how long have when was the diagnosis for the fatty liver disease? Like, how long's it been?
It's been 7 years.
Oh, okay. But didn't you get it like I mean after your transplant, how long did it take for you to find out about the fatty liver disease after a transplant?
So I had the transplant in 21
Right.
and I had the liver biopsy in 22.
Okay.
So I've known since
About
then.
2 years, yeah.
And
Okay.
um, and I'm pretty careful about my diet. Um, and there's the only other thing that, and it's an important thing that you can do if you have this disease, you need to exercise.
For sure. Yeah.
And you know, that's a little difficult to do when you have long COVID also. But, you know, I just pace myself and I just do what I can do. And um, because I was pretty much bedridden for a year and a half after I got COVID, I didn't exercise for most of that time. And so I had to really get myself back on track and get fit again. And so I'm careful about that too. I make sure that I um, exercise every day to some extent. I mean, it's not the way I used to exercise by any
Yeah.
means, but just to keep myself in shape and fit and
Yeah.
keep the disease from taking over my liver again.
Yeah. So do they say anything about maybe, is there like any way that you can improve from all of this? Like improve from the long COVID or the fatty liver disease? Like, is there something that you can work towards to have some improvement with less fatigue? Or is this kind of like a chronic thing that you're gonna just have to deal with now?
Well, at the moment, I think they're both chronic. But I'm hopeful because there's a lot of research going on in terms of long COVID, and people are trying very hard to find something that works. Um, and in terms of the liver disease, besides exercise, watching what you eat, limiting added sugar in your diet, um, it, there's not there's not a cure,
Yeah.
but I can hopefully stop it where it is.
Yeah.
There's one medication that's been approved by the FDA for MASLD. I'm not a candidate for it because they won't give it, it's not approved yet for people that have had transplants. Um,
Okay.
but if you have not had a transplant and you have MASLD, make sure you ask your doctor about that one medication,
Yeah.
and he or she should know what that is. I don't have the name in front of me.
Yeah.
Begins with an R. Do you know it? But anyway,
No, I've never heard of it.
everybody knows about it, and your doctor will know, but just
Okay.
ask about that. But mostly it's up to you. You have to watch what you eat and exercise and take care of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your book because you wrote a book about all of this. So I want to hear, unless there's more to your story that you want to share, but I want to hear about your book.
So that first year and a half that I was pretty much bedridden, that's what I did with my time
Yeah.
is researched my disease because that's what I do to cope with things anyway. But I'm just really, it was so out of the blue and so shocking to me
Yeah.
that it could happen without me even having really symptoms. I started to think about I really want to help people identify it early and avoid what I had to go through. But I also wanted to understand what had happened to me. So I just started researching, MASLD and MASH and cirrhosis. And all of that information is in the book. But I also wrote my story and took people through what happened to me and what I was feeling and thinking at the time. And then I also, the last chapter is what to do about it, what you can do to delay any progression of the disease. And that's really the trick. Um, you want to turn it around, and you may not be able to take away the damage that was done to your liver, but you definitely can prevent it from spreading to more of your liver. And that's what happens. The When you have too much sugar or artificial sugar in your diet, it turns into fat, lipids that are in your bloodstream. And those lipids attack your liver and over again and wound it and scar the liver. That's what cirrhosis is, the scarred liver.
Right.
So you can prevent it from getting worse. Uh, and there there is some evidence that you might be able to turn some of the damage back, especially with that new medicine that has been approved. Um, but as long, you know, when you have liver disease, you're usually asymptomatic until really, really far along in the disease. So if you can nip it in the bud and try to stop it from getting worse, you'll be okay. And that's what I really hope that people will get the message that this really does happen, and you won't know it until it's too late if you just are going on your symptoms. But there are tests that doctors can do to test whether your liver is functioning well. And so talk to your doctor about that and ask them to test you for liver disease because it's becoming so very common. Even children are getting it now. And that's really tragic. And but there are
Yeah.
pediatric liver transplants that are happening because of this disease.
Yeah. So you wrote your book and you got it published and it's out and it talks a lot about your story and about the liver disease. What is it called?
It's called Don't Call My Liver Fat.
Right. I
One
love
of
that.
the reasons they changed the name of this disease is because it used to be called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Uh-huh.
And they wanted to get rid of the non-alcoholic part because it's never good to call something after what it's not.
Right.
but they wanted to rid of the fatty liver disease because there's so much stigma associated with it.
Yeah.
And while obesity seems to go along with it a lot of the time, but not all the time. I mean, not you don't have to be obese to get this. Um, but many people that are obese are vulnerable to this
Right.
disease. But anybody, I think, who gets fatty, and it's called fatty liver disease, doesn't like that. And it doesn't feel good. And it's
Right.
not because you're fat. It's not because you eat too much.
Yeah.
It's because specific chemicals or foods um, are harming your liver.
Yeah.
So it's a metabolic disease.
Right. Okay. When did you finish writing your book? Like, how long did it take? And when was it officially published?
It was just officially published in October of this year.
Oh, so it's pretty recent. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and Amazon uh, calls it best new release. It was called that twice so far,
well,
and
congratulations.
that's just based on how many
Yeah.
people buy it. But it has sold a lot, and I didn't do it because I thought I would make a lot of money. You don't make a lot of money when you publish a book.
Right.
I really did it because I wanted to help people avoid getting this disease or
Yeah.
deal with it. The
Right.
really sad part about it is when people get diagnosed with this disease, so many doctors don't tell them what to do. They don't, tell them the lifestyle changes they can make that will really, really impact the health of your liver.
Yeah.
And that I just see that over and over again. And it, I wanted people to know what they could do. And when you have the motivation that you might get this disease or you might even die, that makes it easier to make those changes, which
Right.
are hard to make, I
Yeah.
admit, but necessary for your health. So it took me probably 2 years to write the book.
Okay.
Um, I changed it a lot from the first version. Uh, because my donor was my half sister, there was that whole sub story about our families, our father, really,
Yeah.
person that we had in common. And I ended up pulling that out of the story. Um, so it changed a lot from the time I started until the end. And
Yeah.
I had a really helpful editor, and she helped me with that. And her name's on the book also. Um, her name is Brenda Cortez, and Brenda's a organ. Um, she has donated an organ herself,
Oh,
so she writes about that a lot, and she knows a lot about it.
it's always nice to have somebody who kind of knows the whole transplant world or what you're going through, help you with things like that, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it really was. And I had no idea that the whole transplant world that is out there existed
Yeah.
before I published the book. And since then, I've come to realize there are just so many people out there who have either donated or received a donated organ. And it's been really, really nice to meet those people and talk with them and
Yeah,
share with them. And there's a big support system out there.
for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I had my transplant how big of a community it is. And I didn't realize until I started this podcast really how big of a community it is.
Really?
And yeah, and it's nice that there's so many people that you can relate to and talk to and get support from. And so I learned a lot on social media and I learned a lot from the podcast too. That
Uh-huh.
there's so many people. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're going through it, it really feels like you're out there by yourself.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it really helps to know that other people have been through it and have survived and done well.
Yeah. So tell me where can people find your book? Is it just Amazon or is there other places that they can get it from?
Well, the way it works is that bookstores can opt to buy books from a central listing. So I don't know who has bought the book in terms of bookstores, but it is definitely on Amazon. And
Okay.
any bookstore can order you for it if you don't use Amazon. And I'm told that if you go into Amazon and just put in Sue Green, my book comes up.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I'll find it and I'll put a link to it in my podcast show notes so people can find it easily.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
so I do have one more question for you, and I like to ask almost everybody
Uh-huh.
if you had a piece of advice to give to somebody who is pre-transplant that you wish that you had known before your transplant, what would that be?
That would be, and there are other people that feel this way in the liver disease community. If people would just pay attention to what they drink and drink water, don't drink things with sugar or artificial sugar in them, that would change uh, the scope of this disease so much. So many people drink their way to liver disease.
Yeah,
Not necessarily alcohol. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about sodas and any drink that has sugar and artificial sugar in it. So what you want to drink is water, and even coffee is good for your liver without sugar in it.
right.
So I think that if people would do that, it would really change um, the scope of the disease.
Yeah, that's
And
great
I would
advice.
I would want to help anyone to avoid having to have a transplant.
Yeah,
It's a miracle, but it's no fun to go through.
right. Yes. Very good advice. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I think that everything that you said is really going to make people think about what they're doing and maybe do a little bit more research. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
All right. You're welcome. You have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.